All right, welcome to your stats warm up. All right, question one. You have probably seen and awkwardly tried to avoid that person at the mall with a clipboard asking questions. Explain why even a large sample of mall shoppers would not provide a trustworthy estimate of the current unemployment rate. So, why might it not be a good idea to be sampling at the mall to find out information about the unemployment rate? All right, so the idea here is basically like where you're pulling your sample from. So it's possible that people at the mall are not reflective of the entire population. All right, and then more specifically for this case in particular, so more specifically, people that are out of a job probably aren't shopping at the mall. All right, so the general idea here is just that you always want to make sure that your where you're pulling your sample from is sort of reflective of the entire population. And if you're trying to find out information about the unemployment rate and you're only talking to people at the mall, you might be missing out on something, right? You might think that the unemployment rate is lower than it actually is, because chances are, if you're unemployed, you're not, wandering on the mall and window shopping, right? So probably not going to give you a very reliable estimate. Question two. A newspaper advertisement for an upcoming TV show said, should handgun control be tougher? You call the shots in a special call-in poll tonight. If yes, call 1-900-I-HATE-GUNS. If no, call 1-900-I-LOVE-GUN. Charges 50 cents for the first minute. Explain why this opinion poll is almost certainly biased. All right. Obviously, this is a little exaggerated, but it drives home the point. Um, this is a voluntary response sample. And not only is it a voluntary response sample, you have to pay to participate, which makes it even more limiting. So this is a voluntary response sample, so only those people with really strong opinions are likely to reply. All right, so yeah, you're going to gather data, but it's probably not reflective of the population. And again, we always take samples and we gather data to try to make estimates about the general population. All right, now number three is an important question because there's a common misconception in here. So let's talk about this. A high school student's newspaper plans to survey local businesses about the importance of students as customers. From telephone book listings, the newspaper staff chooses 150 businesses at random. Of these, 73 return the questionnaire mailed by the staff. Identify the population and the sample. All right, so the population is all the local businesses. All right, and that's not usually the part that trips kids up, The part that trips kids up is the second part. All right. Now the sample is not the 73 that returned the questionnaire. The sample is the 150 businesses chosen at random. All right. And we'll talk about that in a second. All right. So, but the sample is the 150 businesses chosen at random. So, why is the sample not the 73? All right. The sample is who you select. All right. So we selected 150 businesses. Now, 73 of them responded, which means that 77 did not respond. All right. And the fact that 77 did not respond is important information. All right. It tells you something. It tells you, like, okay, we had these 77 that didn't respond. Is there something in common with those 77? Like, is there information we can glean from the fact that 77 businesses didn't respond? Whereas if you just say, oh, we only surveyed 73 people, then someone would assume that, okay, you randomly selected 73 and everybody responded, so there's nothing to learn from those other 77. So the sample is what we define as the researchers. And as the researchers, we define that there were 150 businesses that we selected. It would have been great if they all responded, but they didn't. And that's pretty common in survey research, right? You're going to put out X number of surveys, you're going to send out X number of whatever, and you don't expect everyone to respond, all right? In general, you actually have to incentivize people to respond. You usually have to offer them some sort of gift card or some sort of benefit or some sort of perk to respond. And even then, not everyone is going to respond. All right. There's going to be limited participation. But when you're designing it, you set the sample and then you start looking at things like response rate. Like, okay, our sample was 150 and our response rate was roughly 50%, or our response rate was 30%, or our response rate was 90%. And that response rate is valuable information. So you can't just pretend like your sample was only 73. Your sample was 150, 73 people responded, 77 people didn't respond. All right. So it's important to remember that and kind of keep that clear, because otherwise you can sort of mislead people if you suggest that this was your entire sample. All right. So the sample is 150 businesses chosen that respond. And then I'm just going to add here 73 responded and 77 did not respond. All right. But that in itself is valuable information, and we want to recognize that, not just gloss over the fact that we talked to 150 and just say, oh, 73, that's our sample. No, our sample was 150, and we had this problem where a lot of people didn't respond. Okay, so again, just keep that in mind, because that is one thing that kids sometimes goof up, and they want to say that this is the sample when in fact it's the people that you sent it out to. All right, number 4. Suppose 1,000 iPhones are produced at a factory today. Management would like to ensure that phones display screens meet their quality standards before shipping them to retail stores. Since it takes about 10 minutes to inspect an individual phone's display screen, managers decide to inspect a sample of 20 phones from the day's production. All right, explain why it might be difficult for the managers to study a SRS of 20 phones that are produced each day. Okay, so why might this be logistically difficult? Can it be done? Sure, it can be done. Obviously, it can be done. But why might it be logistically difficult, and why might it not be worth the effort? All right, so it goes into the definition of an SRS. So a SRS requires that each phone has an equal probability of selection, and that all samples how do I want to word that? Not all samples, all possible samples are allowed. So another way I'm going to say is no restrictions. So what do I mean by no restrictions? If you randomly generate numbers and you happen to get the first 20 phones of the day, then an SRS says, okay, fine. Like, even though that doesn't seem ideal, if that's what was randomly selected, that's what we go with. If we happen to randomly select the last 20 phones, okay, that's what we go with. We don't force it to be some in the middle, some at the start, some at the end. Now, in all likelihood, that's what's going to happen anyways when you generate random numbers, but we don't ever force it. We don't require certain amounts from certain groups. So every possible sample of 20 phones is allowed, no matter what happens. All right, that's what they were saying. All right, so an SRS requires, so in this case, that means waiting until the end of the day numbering each phone and then randomly selecting 20. All right. All right, so logistically, that's just harder to do. Like, you've got to have all 1,000 phones kind of organized and set up. You've then got to randomly select the 20, and then you've got to pull from there. We can't just take them as they go because we don't necessarily know how many are going to be produced each day. So 1,000 were produced today, but maybe tomorrow 1,200 are going to be produced, or maybe tomorrow 1,300 are going to be produced. So we kind of have to wait until they're all done to make sure that every phone gets an equal probability of being selected. And then we can't just be like, oh, we're going to give each one like a 2% chance. And if it happens, we'll take it off the line, because then phones at the beginning have a higher chance of being selected than phones at the end. So basically, we have to wait until every single phone is produced, figure out how many phones were produced, then randomly select it, and nothing can happen until we've done this. So those phones can't be packaged, they can't be shipped out, they can't move over to the other warehouse. Like, logistically, it's just a lot to manage. So even though it's sometimes considered like the ideal way of sampling, it might be too cumbersome to actually carry out. And that's what a lot of this unit is about, is recognizing that, yeah, there's the ideal, but then there's what people are actually dealing with in the real world. You know, they have budgets, they have time crunches, they have this, they have that. They can't always do the ideal. So, like, what can you do that's good enough? So I'm just going to add a sentence here. Logistically, that could slow down other functions at the factory. Okay. B, an eager but not very bright employee suggests that the company should just inspect the last 20 iPhones that were produced today. What kind of sample is this? Why might it not be a good idea? All right, so a couple of reasons. So first of all, this is what's called a convenience sample. All right, basically because it's easy to collect. All right. And why might it not be a good idea? All sorts of reasons. One, you wouldn't, by the end of the day, the machine might be operating differently than it was at the start of the day. So you're not seeing phones produced throughout the day. So temporary problems might not be detected. All right, so if something happened earlier in the day that was goofing phones up, but then it got fixed somewhere in the middle of the day, like you're going to totally miss that. So you're not really getting an idea of how the machines perform throughout the day. Is there a variation in quality? You're looking at it at one sort of set time. And if it was good during that time, it might mislead you. Or if it was bad during that time, it might mislead you to think the whole batch is bad. But either way, it can give you, it's not representative of everything that was produced that day. So we'll just say that. May not be representative of all phones produced that day. All right. Another employee recommends inspecting every 50th iPhone that is produced. Explain why this sampling method would not qualify as an SRS. All right. So first of all, I just want to state this is not necessarily a bad approach. Right? I know the question doesn't ask that, but I just want to get that out there. Like, this isn't necessarily a bad approach, and this is probably the way most factories are going to do it anyways. All right. However, it does not qualify as ASRS because not every phone has the same chance of being selected. And not every possible sample, and not every sample of 20 phones is possible. All right, so we're putting in a restriction that it has to be every 50th phone. So by definition, there are certain samples that are no longer possible. And as soon as you limit the samples that are possible, you're no longer dealing with an SRS. All right, so again, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, just let me know, and I can clarify anything that wasn't clear. All right, have a great day.